yeah, Niall, we'll record for we have a pretty global class once again, so people are in different time zones, so we'll record and share it after. But yeah, thanks again for joining. Is this the third or fourth time you've been with our class? I can't remember. I think I think
This is the third, I think.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, you've aged well, like a fine wine. Nice to see you again. And yeah, thanks for joining. It's a fun class again. We've done a few things that are slightly different than past runs in terms of the sort of, I call it, like, I guess, our learning stack or tech stack we're using. So we're using Snowflake for the first time, which is very fun. A lot of requests from people previously to sort of, they run Snowflake at their own company, or their company's transitioning to Snowflake, so making it even more realistic. We're using so our pal Jay Cannon, we're using Sigma for some visualization stuff. So it's, yeah, there's some new changes to the course, even making it more realistic. But we're yeah, thrilled to have you back. Definitely people from some analytics engineers already, but a lot of people thinking about that as a career path, data engineers, data analysts. So a very good, fun crew once again. So, but I'll kick it over
Awesome.
to Emily and you to mostly run the show.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so welcome back. Glad you're joining us again.
Great to be here.
Yeah, just a reminder for everyone watching, please post in the chat if you have questions. We will be keeping an eye on that if anything comes up. So yeah, feel free to post questions in there. But I guess to kick us off, Niall, if you just want to start with like a little bit about you, your background, kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Niall. I'm currently a senior data engineer at Brooklyn Data, and recently starting a new venture, which I'll talk about later. So I was always very kind of engineering minded kind of growing up, and I was convinced that I wanted to be an electronics person. So I went off to university to study electrical engineering, and then I realized it was basically all maths, and the last 2 years were a bit of a struggle, but I made it, and I then decided that it wasn't for me. So I decided to try out software engineering, and that took me to my first job, where I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And they had a data team, which, like most data teams, had far more work to do than they could do. And so I think they were really getting anyone they could, which happened to be me. So I joined the data team with absolutely no understanding of SQL or anything like this at all. And I'm my first like couple of days in that team, I basically said I'm going to go home and learn SQL, and then I'll come back. So I found an online kind of data academy course or something like that, and it just kind of picked up as much as I could in a couple of days. And like my first kind of on the job experience was in DBT. So I'm I'm like relatively like new to the data space. So that, and I imagine like some of the people on your team, like their kind of first exposure to data was in this sort of modern world. I'd never known a world without these modern tools that we use today, which is kind of interesting, but also tricky at times, especially when I'm a consultant, and I don't know how hard it has been for people in the past. I just have to like believe it has been hard. um, and yeah, so that's kind of where I started. That was my first role at a startup in London, who were doing kind of like an estate agent, but all kind of cool and startup-y and venture funded. So that was my first few months, and then I moved to a company called Tails.com, again in the UK, who are like direct to door pet food delivery. And that was the kind of first place where I got exposure to the kind of infrastructure side of things. So that was like a really big AWS powered company, and I kind of went really deep on some of that stuff and infrastructure, and like running data services on Kubernetes clusters and things like that, which I'd never done before. I was there for a year, and then I then moved over to Brooklyn Data, which was April of last year. So I've now been at Brooklyn Data Co for 18 months and having a great time. So that's, yeah.
That's awesome. It's interesting, yeah, like hearing about um people who, either started their career in more sort of like legacy data stacks and then like moved over to like the modern data stack, and how their experience is different from like people who just started with like all of these amazing tools and like communities and stuff like that. So like, so you started learning data like with DBT. Like, do you
Yeah.
think, what year was this? So just I have context of like how early this was on in like the
This
DBT world.
this was 2019.
2019, okay.
So I
So
think there
yeah,
was still like sub 1,000 Slack
yeah, okay.
users.
Yeah. I think that's when I started using DBT too, was like 2019. So yeah, before sort of this like the huge inflection point. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, interesting. So
but
do
it was
you
still ramping up. It was
yeah,
like
yeah.
I remember at the time there was like a London DBT meetup, and there were maybe kind of 40 or so people there. And there was like one big company that was maybe using DBT. And obviously now it's like you can't go anywhere without people talking about it, which is
Yeah.
just crazy.
Yeah. So you joined the company, you learned SQL, learned DBT. What sort of like do you think helped you the most like in that journey? Like what sort of skills did you pick up that were like, okay, like this is like the best thing I could have learned like as I was starting out?
Yeah, oh, that's a really good question. I think something which just helps you in like any tools you're working with is being able to like debug them. I think, and that's something that like just gives you so much independence and more kind of speed to solve these problems. So kind of as early on as possible, when a model goes wrong, like working out a process that you can use to understand and pinpoint like where the things are going wrong. Because when you work that process out well, like your iterations become so much quicker. I think the first step is usually going from having to ask someone else for help to being able to solve more of them yourself. But then even that process that you use yourself, like improving that over time, um, it's just makes an absolutely enormous difference. So I'd say it's things like knowing how to find the compiled SQL in like your DBT project and using then the database's own editor rather than firing DBT run over and over again. Just things like that. Um, and just being able to like hone in so you kind of like you rule out where things are working, where things are definitely working until you can get to the point where you like really isolate the problem. I think that's like a massively beneficial skill.
Yeah, I think definitely agree with that. Um, learning how, yeah, I think learning how to troubleshoot and like how to ask good questions is really important, especially how huge the like DBT Slack is now. Like
Yeah.
getting your question noticed and answered, I think might be like a little harder than it used to be, but if you like have all the right context and the right information in there, like it makes it easier for people to help you.
Yeah, it's super weird. I mean, like a few years ago, you could just put a message in that DBT chat and like someone in the core team would probably reply in an hour. The difference now is there are like way more resources, but you're just way less likely to find someone to answer your question like directly to you. So, like, I mean, it's things like search features and like understanding what a good thing to search for is when you have a problem, and things like that become way more important. And yeah, like I think something as well uh, that I like the phrase that people say that people who are kind of good engineers just like know what to Google, and it definitely is true. Over time, you get better at filtering out what the right answer is from the wrong ones.
Yes. Learn learn how to Google.
For sure.
I think your experience at like Brooklyn Data super interesting because like you get to see all these different companies, like how their data stack is set up, like how their data teams are structured, maybe like the most common problems that are coming up across these different companies that you guys are coming in to like help them with. What sort of when you're going in to like, help a company or a data team like with their data stack, what's sort of the most common problems that they're dealing with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the interesting thing with data and the tools that we're using are that most people who don't work for a consulting firm, who just like work at a kind of I'll call it a normal company, because all this stuff is so new. Most people have only ever seen like one way of solving these problems, and it's at the company they currently work at. We're now, some people have now had a couple of jobs at a couple of different companies where they've maybe used like slightly different tech stacks. But it's definitely quite unique to data, I'd say. And so when you're just at one company, like people know one way of solving it, and it's probably the way they've worked out themselves. It's probably not something they've brought with them from somewhere else. But then going from that to a consulting company, all of a sudden you see all these people who are, they're solving the problems themselves still, but you see lots of different ways of solving them. Stuff that's common across those companies. Oh, that like industries are they're so different, and that's what makes consulting kind of very interesting to me, is that people have very different data they're working with. And so similar industries have similar problems. E-commerce people, they're usually looking at their events and they're trying to work out how they sell more stuff. But even within that, people come up with all kinds of interesting ways to sell things to customers, whether it's like subscriptions, like bundles, or like it feels like it's going to be similar, but everyone has their own definition for like what a sale is, even, or for all of these different problems. Which is which is super interesting. But the kind of basic stuff still holds through around build data products like features. I really like that that kind of philosophy. And as long as you're kind of focusing on what this does for the business, does it give people answers more quickly? Does it help them understand their core metrics? Like really just focusing on that core stuff and having that in mind with whatever you build goes a really long way. Part of the disadvantage of having so many tools now is that you can quickly just become sucked up in which tools do I need, rather than it being like which problems should we solve. So yeah, that's something I try and keep in mind.
Now, maybe just double click on that a little. Like when you say build data products like features, I think probably some people know what you mean, but maybe explain that a little. Just what's that versus the alternative?
Yeah, so I mean that really bringing that software kind of way of thinking about building to data. So short iterations, working in an agile way, gathering feedback, and developing incrementally. So people ask for some new data. Like, what's the quickest way that you can get that to them, so that they can say, actually, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't want that. You want to find that out as soon as possible, right? You don't want to have built 20 models, build an amazing dashboard, and then they go, oh no, that's not what I meant. So like failing as quickly as possible, I think, is like really important. And then over there is your like requirements get more and more honed, and people tell you what they do and they don't want. Then you can work on making it more robust over time. But like always keeping in mind, like what is it that these people want? And often people don't. That's the other thing. You can't assume that people are right when they tell you what they want. Yeah, it often takes giving them the first version and then iterating and iterating and iterating from there.
Yeah, I think that is a huge, huge skill, like especially as like an early data person, like if you're on a smaller data team, like I remember when I first started at Drizly and we were like starting to make some of these metrics for the business, and like there was so many iterations of back and forth of like, okay, let me do this really quickly, like dump it into an Excel sheet, give it to like the head of sales and be like, okay, is this what you want? Oh no, I wanted this thing slightly different. Okay, like let's go back and like try it again. Like that, I think, is such an important skill as you're like sort of building one, like building trust with your like stakeholders, and like two, just as a process for sort of your like data team to like iterate quickly, like you said, fail as fast as possible. So you're not spending all this time building stuff that like nobody actually wants to look at.
Yeah, yeah, and naturally that process does create like a lot of artifacts as well, and lots of versions of different things. And I think like it's really important to manage that as well. Like what you don't want to have is at the end of 12 months, people are still using all the versions of the things you've made, which often is seen. So I kind of say like, don't be afraid of like deleting old stuff either. I think some people are quite precious about holding on to things. Like if you've got a better version of someone, get like a better version of something, get people onto that new one, and like pull that old one out of the way. In most things are easily recoverable if you do need them at some point. But especially with version control tools like Git, it makes it so easy to recover things. Like if you build a new version of a model, don't call it old and new, just delete it. That's quite a common thing that I've seen as well.
New, no, really new for
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to go through them now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, looks like we have a question on thoughts about self-service data products.
Self-service is such an interesting one. I think lots of like every tool tries to pitch itself as self-service. But like really it's just a kind of question of like how much. It's always a trade-off between how much flexibility do you want to give people, and like how quick is it to use is often the way I think about it. So think like something like Looker. You have to spend a lot of time up front building the kind of semantic layer of the views and the looks, but actually once you've built it, it's so easy to use. But you don't have as much flexibility in terms of like visualizations, for example. There's another tool which is slower to use. So I'm definitely not the person to speak about specific products because I definitely don't spend much time building out dashboards. I'm a big Looker fan. I'll say that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like the trade-off. Like we use Looker at Drizly as well, and it is a really big investment up front to make sure things are set up correctly, and also just sort of the maintenance of making sure things stay that way so it stays easy to use for the business users who are exploring or building stuff out. But yeah, I only really have experience with Looker on that front, so I'm not too sure about the other options. I've used Tableau, but that's like very different, not as much self-service.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say with like most of these, it's so rare that decisions are actually made around like which data products to use. Like you usually either join a company that already has them set up, or if you're kind of lucky enough to then be joining a company where you're setting up something from scratch, you might kind of have these questions. But again, I think this kind of goes back to like use the tools that are there to really focus on kind of delivering a value. It's great to have awareness of the other products that exist, but even if a tool is 20 or 30% better, like the cost of switching to it is so high, especially for kind of those final end user products that have so much logic baked into them. It's actually very rare that people switch between them, in my experience. Like a a BI tool migration project is just like it's a huge amount of work.
Yeah, we went through that moving from Domo to Looker a couple years ago, and it probably took like a full year to get people like totally out of Domo. Eventually, we just had to like shut it off and be like, okay, if you need something, like you have to go to Looker now. Like you can't log into Domo anymore. You kind of have to be really strict about your timelines, I guess, and be like, all right, if it's past X date, like we're shutting everyone off and you can put in new requests for like the new tool. Just like stop supporting the old thing.
At some point you have to.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to sort of your DBT experience, and maybe you can just talk through sort of the process of like you going from like very new to SQL and DBT to like building like DBT packages and like contributing to like the open source project. I think that's a super cool journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, as I said, I started like my first exposure to SQL was through DBT, and I think in my first job I was really just building models and kind of improving models. So there was a good 12 months of really just doing that. So whether it was like adding new features to existing models, and just really trying to get my head around the kind of core concepts of DBT, which are so important to understand. When I then got my second job, it was interesting because rather than having like a DBT cloud hosted DBT environment where you just deploy stuff and it, DBT does it for you, they were using a kind of self-built DBT runner, which to make work well requires a much better understanding of how DBT works, right? You can use DBT Cloud with an auto-generated project and you're kind of away to go. But hosting something yourself requires more understanding. I don't think one is like the right option, whether you go DBT Cloud or host it your own. It entirely depends on like the rest of the stack and the company and the expertise. But for this particular company, I think it did make sense to host it themselves. And actually, we were doing a migration project where I think the models were maybe a couple of years old. Over time, they'd become pretty bloated, pretty slow. There was no longer a really clean lineage that we all dream of. And so we set about like how we need to, first of all, just need to make this thing faster. Like we're not too bothered about re-architecting it yet. We just want to make it quicker, which is usually what people start off with. It's like, keep what we've got, just make it quicker. But we didn't really have a great way of tracking, being data people, we want to see charts and things like that to describe the project. And we didn't have a way to do that. And so I started to look at these artifacts which DBT produces, which are these like JSON files which get put into the target folder whenever you do a DBT command. People might have seen. So there's it's like a manifest file in there, run results, catalog, I think probably another I can't quite remember. And I was looking through them and I kind of saw that actually like all the information that we care about is in here. We've got how long the model took to run, like did the tests pass, did they fail? And using Snowflake has like really good support for JSON, right? You can just load a JSON file straight in. And so we had these files at the end of a run and we put them into the cloud storage and then load them into Snowflake. And then we started running SQL queries on top of them. And kind of after a while of doing that, just realized actually like, surely this would be useful to a lot of people. And so that was when the idea of building the package came out. And so the very first version is quite different now. It doesn't even use those artifacts. But the first version of the package, it would like upload these JSON files and then process them out into these really nice clean models, which just show you like the number of, you'd have like a row per model, a row per run of the model, a row for the tests as well. And that was a great opportunity to just learn a ton more about DBT as well. I definitely didn't know how to make a package before I made a package, if you know what I mean. It was like it seems like a really fun thing to do. Um, and like actually, in open source generally, I think is such a great way to like push your understanding beyond what you'd be doing day to day in your job. And so I've definitely like benefited massively from that project. And just kind of contributing to open source stuff in general, I'd really highly recommend people. Like it's amazing how generous people are with their time in terms of giving you advice and reviewing pull requests on open source projects. Especially Jeremy over at TBT. He's given me far too much of his time over the last couple of years on various questions and DBT pull requests. So yeah, I'd kind of highly recommend to anyone, if you kind of come across something in DBT which is kind of a bit awkward that you'd like to improve, or take a look at the issues. And there's a really nice tag that they use which basically just says like good first issue. And so you can go onto the issues page of the DBT repository and just filter for all of those. And they range from like improve some documentation, which is like a great first pull request, right? You just make it a bit easier for someone else to use, and it's still like a really valuable contribution to other things which might be like a small code change. Go and have a look. I'd really encourage people to go and do that.
Yeah, that's great. I'll share after this in our Slack. I'll share the links to where you can find that stuff. But yeah, I think that's great. A great way to see, what people care about, like what issues are people submitting, like what does it actually mean to like, maintain an open source tool like DBT.
Well, and the other thing for me at the time in the data team, we had a couple of little software projects that we kind of built ourselves and maintained, fairly small. And so I had never experienced contributing to a big code base that lots of people working on, and it's a completely different experience to just building something you built yourself, because all of a sudden you open up a repo like DBT core and it's big, there's like tons of stuff in it, and actually just the process of working out how to contribute to something like that and test it locally and develop it locally is really, really valuable, and goes back to this stuff we were talking as well. Like if you can just find different ways to develop your skills on different projects of different sizes, and that's a really, really valuable thing to do. I remember a couple of years ago, I wrote having a read of that around how to go about contributing for the first time.
Now we lost you for 1 second. Sorry. How to go? We caught the end. How to go about contributing for the first time. So sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No. Very ropey internet here. I wrote a blog post a couple of years back, like after I'd made a couple of my first contributions to it, just to kind of get down like what I'd learned and how to go about it, which I'll share with everyone later if anyone's interested to read that.
Cool. Yeah, definitely share that. Yeah, to your point about like working on projects of different sizes, I think that's a really good point of like how often, unless you're working at like a massive company, like how often are you, contributing to a project that has, hundreds of other people, committing changes and stuff. It's like totally different than maybe what you're used to, of like if you're depending on the size of your company. But like, my data team is 20 people, but maybe only like half of them are contributing to our DBT repo versus like, hundreds of people, just totally different. So I think that's a really good point.
And just like super satisfying. Like I think that I don't know about other people, but I think kind of my biggest motivator kind of work and stuff is just building things that you can see makes other people's work kind of easier, and any, anything that, getting a pull request merged into something like DBT, I find really, really satisfying. And sending out into the world. Look at that. That was quick. He's found the blog post.
Yeah, your SEO is pretty good now. The
only other one that I'll mention as well is a tool called SQL Fluff, which is like a SQL linter. So when I was in my last job, the head of data there was love SQL Fluff. I love that you love SQL Fluff. The head of data there had been working on this tool to just try and improve the consistency of the SQL layer, because it was, we'd have some people who are hammering out really shouty uppercase SQL statements, and other people were doing, yeah. So you kind of switch between files, and it would be like reading a completely different language. And so that was Alan who started that, and then we made an organization for it a couple of years ago, and it's just kind of blown up since. So if anyone is not heard of it and interested in getting consistent SQL formatting, definitely check it out. There's also like an online version if you ever just want to do a one-off reformatting of a SQL query. If you just Google like SQL Fluff online, you can just copy and paste in a really awful SQL query, and it will just tidily format it for you, which is a really useful resource. But yeah, so if anyone is looking for other open source stuff to contribute to, like, I'd really also recommend SQL Fluff as and it's, I'm not going to say it's easy to contribute to, because they're all still fairly big, but it's it's kind of it has well enough isolated components to work on, which makes it actually quite a nice project to contribute to if you're kind of used to it. Like, you don't have to necessarily understand too much about the project to make a contribution. Whether it's like adding a little dialect change, so that this happens all the time, that Snowflake will add a new function, SQL Fluff doesn't understand it yet, and so someone will come in and add a pull request just to make SQL Fluff know that this like new word exists in the dialect. So there are a bunch of issues like that. Again, like tagged good first issue if anyone's interested.
Yes. Also, +1 to that, we use SQL Fluff in our like CI/CD, and I'm gonna post in the chat our I
Oh yeah,
to the GitHub Actions repo and put in our workflow in there. So if anyone uses GitHub Actions, like, you can really just copy and paste our action from there and start using it. I love when I like hear people will like randomly message me on like DBT Slack and be like, hey, I used your GitHub action, like, thanks so much. Like, that's also like my favorite part of contributing to stuff, is like people being like, oh my god, this helped me. Like, oh, that's like makes me feel so good.
yeah, it's the best. It's the best. Yeah, the other one is, in fact, the DBT artifacts package that we were talking about before. We've also got SQL Fluff set up on there. So if anyone just like, I think we also have some example rules and stuff. So if anyone wants to see like a live in action automated SQL Fluff workflow, check out the DBT artifacts repo as well.
I will try to find that and send it as well.
Oh, actually, you're doing all the work here. I'll have a look as well.
I think this is it. Is it in the Brooklyn data repo?
That's it.
Yeah.
So there's the tox file, which has got the whole thing. But yeah, have a look around. If anyone has any of this stuff, by the way, my Slack DMs are always open.
Yeah. Are you in the new CoRise Slack?
Well, I don't know.
I might not be.
Okay, we'll have to add you.
But it sounds like I will be.
Yeah, we'll add you in there.
Yeah, now my email drip campaign to get you hasn't gotten you yet, so I'll have to ask you. All right, I'll just make a little announcement. If anyone contributes to one of these projects like DBT Core, SQL Fluff, DM me and Emily, and well, no credit for past contributions, but future contributions, and we'll hit you with some CoRise credit.
Awesome.
Cool. So maybe we can talk a little bit about like what you're working on now with Snowflake, right?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working with Snowflake for the last kind of couple of years, and I definitely have like a love-hate relationship with it. I don't know about how other people feel. I love how quick it is, and a bunch of other things, but there are some parts which I've only in the kind of last year I've really tried to kind of understand better around, like, how is Snowflake storing data? What makes a query fast? What makes a query slow? And so I'm working on hopefully a product at some point. We definitely don't have one yet, but I'm working on this new thing with a co-founder who was at Shopify until kind of June, and he's left. But now we're basically just writing a ton of blog posts, because we just sort of figured you can't go wrong with writing loads of blog posts and then kind of work out what we want to build later, going back to the SEO. So that's what we're doing, and we've got a few posts out so far. Like I've written one around what a micro partition is in Snowflake. We've got one around how to kind of work out how much queries cost. One of the kind of tricky things about Snowflake's billing model is that you're charged for the time that a warehouse is running. And if you're trying to work out, how you can make things run more efficiently, it's actually quite difficult to work out like what's causing that cost. And so we've got a post there around how you can use some of Snowflake's like usage views they provide to basically attribute that spend back to the queries that run on the warehouse. And obviously it's an attribution. There's no way of actually working out what a query costs, because that's not what you're built for. But it's a way to kind of give yourself a good indicator of which workloads are running efficiently and not. So we have lots more posts planned. I'm going to be writing one of the next week around how to make queries prune effectively, which is like a really key driver of performance. So in fact, where are these posts? I will drop a link right now. We've got a little link that wants to sub to that. No pressure. So yeah, there we go. Take a look at that. So yeah, we're just going to be writing a ton of posts for the next couple of months until we've worked out what it is we want to build. So yeah, be sure to check them out.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you all build. I know me and you have talked a lot about Snowflake cost and stuff. So yeah, I'm really interested in that topic as well. So interested to see what happens. Super cool. Oh, someone said the link.
Oh, oh wait, what?
Oh, I think it was just me and Emily. Hold on a second. Boom.
Oh, there you
Did
go.
nobody see any of my other
Cool.
links?
Yeah. No, I think I it just had switched, so we're all good now. Yeah, links.
Oh, thank you for
I'll
spotting
post
that.
them
I'm sorry.
all.
Oh yeah, I see a couple more. Yeah, I'll add
I'll
some.
post them all in Slack too, after this. So if people didn't catch them in here, we'll get them in Slack.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I kind of love talking to people about Snowflake stuff. So if you have any questions about queries or a request for a post, please send them over. Like we're really interested in kind of building creating the most kind of relevant content for people as possible. So yeah, please reach out if you've got any questions.
Yeah.
I went to the Snowflake Summit back in June, and it was just a mind-blowing experience. It was my first tech conference, especially, but yeah, kind of pulling back the veil on what Snowflake's actually doing and being able to speak to some of the engineers there. So yeah, if anyone is ever considering going and they're into Snowflake, I would highly recommend it.
You were a popular guy saying, "Hey, anyone interested in lowering their Snowflake bill?" that was your intro.
It was so funny at the conference, because they had a few talks around how to improve performance and reduce cost, and people were queuing down the full length of the exhibition center. No joke. it was like, okay, this is why people are here. That's interesting.
So Coalesce is next week. Are you giving a talk? Are you going to be there?
I won't. My co-founder's doing a talk actually. Thank you for reminding me of that. On like Snowflake optimization, which is on the it's an online one, so you don't have to like be paid to go or anything. Like anyone can tune into that at all. And I'll make a note to get the link over to that as well if anyone is interested to listen.
Awesome.
I'll be going to the London one. If there's anyone here from London who's going to that, maybe not, probably not, but I'll be there if anyone is.
There might be. Do we have anyone in London, Jake?
I can check our.
If so, I'll post the info to that in Slack as well. But awesome. We have like a couple minutes left. If maybe we just want to, we usually end with like just asking if you have just any like good general advice for the class as they're getting started on their either data or DBT journeys.
Yeah, sure. I think really coming to courses like this is a really great thing to do. Not only are you getting some kind of structured like training on this stuff, but also you're meeting loads of people here. I think just having connections that you can reach out to ask questions is so important, just to get different ideas and ways of doing things. So I'd encourage you all to kind of keep in touch with each other and have bi-monthly meetings with people at different companies and kind of ask them about their careers and what they're enjoying and what they're learning about. Like, definitely do that. I've been like really grateful to have some kind of good connections who have like helped me find the job that I have now, saved me hours of Googling, all that good stuff. So yeah, definitely make use of the people that you kind of met here. And if anyone is interested to ask about Brooklyn data or apply, feel free to reach out to us more about that as well. I really, really, really love working there. We're up to about like 80 or 90 people now across the world, so you don't have to be in a specific location. All you need is a laptop. So feel free to reach out if you're interested in that.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, Niall, so much. So we're very grateful for you to come back, and I'll get you on the CoRise Slack, and Emily will curate all the links. That's one of her titles, VP of Links. So I'll go from there.
All the links. Great. Thanks so much.
Of course.
Thanks, Kyle.
Bye for now. Bye.